So, welcome everyone who's here with us today, listening to this conversation. I invited Misha Collins to come and have a down to earth and heart to heart conversation about Hurricane Helene and both of our experience, my live experience, and in the aftermath, Misha's visit, and some of the important teachings and topics that it touches for our collective right now. So, Misha, I've known you a long time, and I'm really grateful that you're willing to have this talk today, and may it benefit all those who are listening. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
And maybe we start by hearing a little bit about your visit to the area, and then I'm happy to share some of my firsthand experience. My husband and I losing our home and our belongings and the aftermath of that. But first, I'm just curious for you to talk about how did it feel to go visit the area and what did you see?
You hear this said all the time, but seeing it on TV, seeing it in photographs, even seeing the video that you posted and the stills that you shared of your house, then going up there and seeing it in person, it was quite a lot to process in person, because it just becomes tangible when you're there. And imagining, was transported to my imagined experience of your being in the house as it collapsed, and the sights and sounds of and sensations of that experience and what that must have been like for you. um and there was also just so poignant to see, there was an empty suitcase lying in the debris behind your house, and a photograph of you that was on the ground and half covered in mud, and your pile of books in your office, and so many of these artifacts of a life being lived in that house, and it just made it all feel so resonant and relevant. um it's been interesting having a couple of conversations with you in this process,
Mhm.
and the connections and extrapolations that come from an experience like this, and figuring out, you know what does this mean about our role in the world at this time, and how, when one of these climate disasters has a personal impact on you, does it shift your course? And I was thinking in advance of our conversation about the questions that I have for you, and I have a few,
Mhm.
um, because, of course, you are you have spent a good amount of your career, not only, well, I guess your life and your career, talking about how darkness can be a guide and a teacher, and how difficult experiences can lead us to the light. And this is yet another one of those teachers. And also, it sucks. It's both things.
Yes, I appreciate you acknowledging that, Misha. Just this morning, I had a little meltdown around all of it. And my husband and I were reflecting on how we are very deeply spiritually resourced people. And so, if even for us, this feels so overwhelming, so beyond anything we had imagined, just so much work to attend to now. How is this for people who might not have the quality of community we have, the quality of community support, and the decades long of meditation practice, which has been golden throughout this. So it's been really rough. I think the first phase after it happened was kind of a religious experience, for lack of better words, in which We were on the mountain surviving with our neighbors. We were just mind blown each day that we had made it out alive. We were in this kind of field of um, extreme kindness and compassion that everyone was showering on everyone in our community. And then there was a phase right after that of um, friends helping us to escape the mountain and to get to another place. And that still felt sort of like a very expansive spiritual experience because, again, the magnitude of community support was a real gift. And then we're in the third phase now. And I think this is the harder one where it's like, okay, now it's us and this unbelievable to-do list and forms, and my husband still doesn't have his ID, and there's little you can do without your ID, and just all of that kind of thing, how to piece together this puzzle. But we have trust and we have presence, and I know that we'll make it through this, but there are so many who have been impacted. And one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with you is that I've had many experiences and I've been aware of climate crisis since I was a very young person. I've been a student of environmental studies and climate change, but there's such a difference in seeing on the news what's happening and seeing the devastation that we witness in so many different places versus both personal experience and as you've had going to see in person. And I want to commend you for the fundraiser that your nonprofit Random Acts has directed to the area. I really want to help spread awareness for what are the teachings of these kinds of climate events. What does it mean to prepare, though really ultimately the only preparation is ourself on one level? And also, what is the invitation when we really accept that like this is the age we're living in, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Eden, I thought it might be useful just in case anybody's listening to this who's coming to it not knowing your story, and how we know each other. But Eden, I will speak to an audience right now. I met Eden. Um, I don't know how long ago, 8 years ago, perhaps. My kids were very little.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe longer. It might have been 10 years ago. Um, as a meditation teacher, and then we have stayed in touch for many years, and all of those years. And Eden has come to my support and our family support during hard times and just over the normal course of life as well, and has really been kind of a mentor and teacher to me for a long time. And then the hurricane hit North Carolina particularly hard, and I happened to be going to Charlotte for a fan convention right after the event hit, and the confluence of those two events spurred myself and my castmates to rally to do something and put together a fundraiser, which is something that we have done several times in the past around climate related disasters. But it's interesting to note that it's not something we do every time there's a climate disaster because I think we simply don't have the resources, nor do people have the ability to pay attention to everything that comes along because there are just so many incidents that need our attention. But as those things were coming together, by coincidence, and not a happy coincidence, I learned that Eden had been one of the victims of the hurricane, that Eden and her husband Mark had lost their home. And I heard lost your home, and I was like, but that's not. It just means like it got really wet, right? But then when I went out to the Asheville area to deliver some supplies that we had collected and saw it in person, the house was really swept away in a mudslide and cut in half, or actually about to me, it looked like maybe 2/3 of the house was actually swept away, but the rest of it was just cleaved, and there really is no usable how what remains has collapsed, and there is no house left. Um, and that's just a little bit of the sort of framework backstory. Maybe I rambled too long, and luckily we have the capacity to edit.
Thanks, Misha. I think you rambled perfectly, and thank you for sharing that backstory. And I'll just name the events that occurred since the storm began were really unlike anything I could have imagined. I wasn't actually supposed to even be home. I had just led a retreat in the Northeast, meditation retreat about embracing the unknown, and we did quite an exploration of what we called life quakes people have experienced throughout their lifetime. And I was supposed to go to a teacher's retreat just after that, an eco Dharma group I'm part of on climate change. And instead, I had just a really minor injury I wanted to attend to, and had a sense that I needed to go back home, which I'm grateful because I never would have wanted my husband to be there alone. But what began as just a normal storm, like a storm we've had many experiences of, no message that there was any need to evacuate, no message that things would be very hardcore. The hurricane was supposed to go sort of around our area. And I don't think they found out until the middle of the night before the disaster really hit that it was taking a different course, and that in fact Asheville and Black Mountain and were really the epicenter, like the bullseye of the storm. So none of us knew that, given we were asleep and there was not internet when we woke up in the morning. And my husband and I just sort of started our day thinking, okay, so there might be a power outage like we've had before. We had extra candles, extra ice in the fridge, like very innocent approaches to bad weather. And we were outside just seeing if our creeks, which we have two on either side of the house, needed a little bit of reinforcement. But we had no idea as the rain got a lot harder, without understanding that the previous rain from the past few days had moistened the land to a degree that around, I don't know if I'm right on linear time, but it felt like maybe 10 a.m. that morning, out of the blue, in not even a second, but like half a second, the whole mountain behind us, full of trees, debris, structures, someone else's house or shed, came rushing down what had been our innocent, lovable, charming little creek, which turned into a giant, giant, terrifying river. And it just knocked off the office that I spend a lot of time in about a millisecond. And in that moment, sort of the rest of the house began to fill with mud, and our hearts started racing, and we realized, like, this isn't a normal storm. This isn't what we expected. And very soon after that, um, we knew another room was at danger of being just pushed off, and then tree fell on the house, the propane tank got punctured, and everything sort of started getting very, very scary. And anyone listening who's had that kind of experience, which a lot of people haven't, of like, I'm suddenly in a life or death situation I didn't expect to find myself in. We found ourselves in that situation very quickly, and grabbed what we thought we needed to grab to make a safe escape. And it was very just surreal. The whole thing has been surreal. Even leaving the house, we didn't know that was a safe step because it was so dangerous outside. But we knew at that moment the inside was starting to be really terrifying, so we better get out. And right before we did, the house just started caving down on us. So my husband could dive out the front, and I was too far behind him, and just had one of those incredibly humbling, mind-blowing moments of, I think this is it. Like, I think I'm being killed right now. My house is coming down on me. The floor is caving down. I'm being swept under the mud. I don't know what's happening, but house is on top of me and I'm sliding through mud, and really knowing there was nothing to do but surrender, and certainly pray that I either got out alive or I was killed, but that I would not be buried. That's what it felt like. Am I being buried underneath this house? And I'm not sure how it happened, but after a prayer that I put out, a tiny sliver of light opened up on my right side of air where I could squeeze out as quickly as possible before it closed up again. And I just heard my husband's voice, screaming my name. And that told me where to go in the chaos of it. And we were incredibly lucky, like incredibly lucky. This all happened so quickly. That's what's sobering, and what changed my perspective on some of these storms is how quickly our entire house came down out of the blue without even knowing we were in danger. That's changed my perspective on a lot. We were lucky to escape. I emerged, my husband says, like a mud creature. He could just see the whites of my eyes, and he was able to grab me, and a neighbor's house was standing, probably a neighbor's house that you visited when you were there. And so we were really, really blessed. But that was really just the start of it, of recognizing how big is this disaster that just hit? How wide of a region? How many people? Who else is buried? Are there neighbors that need to be unburied? And that began something I've shared with you a lot about, an extraordinary, extraordinary community experience of just seeing people show up without a question, without a pause, full of courage and kindness and support, helping every single person who needed help in whatever ways people could. Yeah. And that sort of continued throughout the aftermath. And it's been really important to witness, really important to witness. Like, one of the best reminders of how good humanity is. And so in the middle of disaster, to have that, well, that's an example right there of the dark and the light hand in hand. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that was a remarkable thing to witness out there.
Yeah.
And I talked to some of your neighbors, and we raised about $70,000 in this fundraiser. And we're talking to a bunch of your neighbors and community members, and asking folks when I was out there, if do you need help? We've raised some money here. Can we help you get back on your feet? And everybody kept saying, we're going to be okay, but you should check on our neighbors. And consistently, I was talking to people where I could see the damage to their house, while they were telling me that they'd rather the resources go to their neighbors,
Yeah.
which was just a lovely and affirming thing to see in the midst of a tragedy.
Yeah. I'll just add that I know some of the places that you visited, and you're talking about people who lost everything like we did, people who got trapped under rubble and debris for long periods of time before being saved by 25 neighbors and a stretcher, um, who lost everything, who cannot rebuild like we can't rebuild where we lived, and who still said, please check on my neighbors first. It's
Yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
yeah. And I will point out that you were one of those people too.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. So we were really, really lucky to have community find out about the situation we were in before we knew they knew. So a neighbor who just had satellite managed to get a text out to family, and that kind of spread through our whole networks, and friends started to GoFundMe for us. And there was a sense of people aware and taking action on our behalf before we even knew they were, which is extraordinary. But so many people who went through this don't have that kind of network. So many people who went through this don't have any resources. And so it's been really wild and humbling just seeing how our communities back home are navigating. Some people still actually don't have power. Most of the people have received some of their basic needs by now, power and water, but it's not everywhere. So what was your experience when you visited of just, yeah, witnessing the aftermath and the destruction and the need?
I was wrestling a lot with this sort of philosophical question, and I think coming to some of my own conclusions on it, but actually, what I actually wanted to ask you about your perspective on it. The experience made me think about, I mean, climate change is such a wonderful example of this. I'm somebody who spends a lot of my time trying to figure out how I can have a positive impact on the world, what I can do, what I can contribute, what is a meaningful thing to do with my life. And yet there are a lot of things in the world that I can look at and kind of feel helpless, and to definitely feel like my one person contribution is never going to make a significant measurable difference. Climate change is such an incredible example of that, because it is something that to alter the course of climate change, to slow the progress of climate change, to reduce the future occurrence of these climate disasters, is going to require major policy shifts and major technological innovations, and the complicity of pretty much everybody. We're all going to have to work on this together. And looking at those things, I found myself grappling with the question of how does one keep doing this work when it's not clear that your one contribution you'll never be able to see a measurable impact of your contribution, most likely. And yet we still do the work. And I guess the question is, why? And that's a
That's,
question for you.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. That's a great question, Misha. And I think a question so many people can relate to. And I'll share what comes up for me around it is I am aware, and I think I have been since I was quite a young person, of being engaged in work that I just knew I wasn't going to see the fruits of in this lifetime, in my lifetime. And in my experience, when we really lean into uh, that I'm doing this work on behalf of the collective and leaning into the support of the collective to do it, meaning we cannot do it alone, even if it's simply personal transformation work alongside the collective transformation work, there's an energy that for me is a greater motivation. And that's I'm doing this for beings of the future. I'm also doing this for my ancestors. I'm doing this because kindness is a force I'm willing to devote my entire life to. I'm willing to stand behind, regardless of the situation, and bring to every context I will ever meet. That in itself is enough. Like kindness is a force of nature. Compassion is a force. And even if we do not see the fruits in this lifetime, work I'm engaged with to help people to awaken to the alternative to patriarchy, to help people awaken to ways of living in partnership with nature, beyond the paradigm that has contributed to climate crisis, to help people wake up to ways of perceiving one another from the heart, beyond the lens of racism and xenophobia. We're not going to see the fruits in our lifetime, I don't believe. But I believe that showing up simply because kindness is a force of nature and it's worth giving our life to, that's enough, that's enough. And so I regularly, and in the meditation Sangha that I guide, the Buddhist community that I work with, we regularly devote the work that we're doing to both beings of the future and to our ancestors, just noticing like we have a chance to address things they apparently did not. And that in itself is enough. And it does feel like enough. And it also requires a great deal of acceptance. Like acceptance is a badass force. And it's not resignation. It's nothing like resignation. But it's like when we really accept that we are all alive in the age of unprecedented, in our lifetimes, climate crisis and changes, and we are going to see more climate refugees. We are already seeing through the heat waves and the excessive rainstorms in so many parts of the world. We're seeing it. When we meet that with acceptance instead of resistance, instead of story, let me create a little story about this, a twist, rather than accepting it for what it is, then I believe we can meet it consciously. And I believe that I just had a community experience of really seeing, and I continue to, because I'm in touch with them every single day, how the people of Western North Carolina are rallying and responding to this consciously for the most part. That to me is enough. Does that make sense or touch anything in you?
Yes, absolutely makes sense. And I have been coalescing around that, more or less that answer for myself, but I've also been noticing the ways in which my own ego wants to see results. And, you know, I get, I think, wrapped up in that to an extent, and struggle with the acceptance. I want to be able to feel like I have impacted the outcome, and I can see that somehow, and I keep kind of fighting my way through things in order to feel that. And I think I find little ways to do that for myself. I give myself little dopamine hits of, I've figured that out. I've done something, and that measurable impact can make me feel good. But it is about the process
Mhm.
and how you engage with these things, and not the product. The product is just an out picturing of the process. And it's very easy for me to get those things confused, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, and I don't think you're alone on that. I think many people grapple with that. I teach a field of work called sacred activism. A lot of people who consider themselves change agents and who have their sleeves rolled up and they're uh, deeply immersed in working through many of the isms we face today, grapple with that question. And I always love the teaching from Zen that you just pointed to, really. It's not what we do, it's how we do it. And so we're not discounting the product. The product is important. The product is important to us. We have an opportunity to make a change in our world, to contribute to change where things need to be addressed. But we will, I believe, perpetuate more suffering if we focus too much on the product and forget that the process is what we have in this moment, and that how we do what we do is also the contribution. And so I'll just share, I come from a family of activists. You and I have talked to them about this. Um, as an example, I have a mom who's done extraordinary work in her lifetime to contribute to very innovative, creative solutions for homelessness. And there was a period of time, a few decades, where there was a great amount of support for her work, and thousands of families were being served in incredibly innovative ways to get out of homelessness, out of the cycle, not just temporary housing, which is overly popular in our world. And then came a change in politics, And a lot of the financial support their work had was lost. And right now, of course, we have a greater homelessness problem than we've ever had. But that doesn't discount the joy, the sense of possibility, the sense of dissolving paradigms, which is powerful in itself, that came from the work that had already been done. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and I find it interesting. There's a study that was done that it's easier for Americans to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. I've always found that just utterly fascinating. Because that keeps us from dreaming more life-affirming visions and economic systems beyond just capitalism as it is. But even in the face of this aftermath, communities in Western North Carolina have had to dream beyond capitalism, have had to lean into, in their own neighborhoods, more gift economy models, more barter and trading. I've also heard of people coming up with solutions for the future, like schools in the area saying, hey, I think we need to build wells that we can rely on for water in the future instead of being reliant on the municipal system. And those are pluses that have come from this disaster. Like when we accept the age we're living in without denial, without pushing it away, without creating stories about it and actually face it. When we face reality with our hearts open, when we face reality, then we can consciously respond. And my prayer right now is that more people are willing with open hearts to face the reality of this time rather than what I talk about in my book, Luminous Darkness, as sunshining, right? Trying to keep things light and pretty and comfortable and avoid difficult topics. So what comes up for you around all that?
Uh, I am just reflecting on that process and product dichotomy and the extent to which I noticed. I mean, I talked to you through these chapters, but I exhausted myself trying to have a good impact in the world. Uh, I I sacrificed myself, and the actual interesting and I managed to pull off some very impressive projects and started, a nonprofit and acquired some Guinness World Records and you know did worked on a lot of political campaigns, and I could point to all of these accomplishments that I had in this field of world and the greater field of world improving. But as I was doing that, I was grinding myself down. And ultimately, the consequence was that I had to stop most of those things and rebuild myself, and went through a long chapter of retracting and not contributing much to the outside world. And it just shed so much light on the fact that if you are not, and it's not about sunshining, it's not about like smiling your way through it, but it's about having the balance and the grace in your process to make it sustainable. It's interesting, talking about climate change and sustainability. It also has to be that process has to be sustainable for yourself. There are a lot of catchphrases that we hear in the modern new age jargon, like self care, which I kind of cringe at. But the truth is, if you are out of balance in the process, and I think that that can even manifest itself as like angry protest, violent, angry political rhetoric that could be on the right side of an issue. But if your approach is one of, if you're being fueled by hatred in the process, if you're being fueled by divisive thinking, ultimately the product that you create will bear those fruits as well.
Yes, thank you for that. And we could expand it out if you're fueled by polarization, if you're fueled by urgency, which is very different than immediacy and conscious response, if you're fueled by even stress, the product will bear the fruit of that. And I've been lucky in my life to witness in a family of do-gooders just some of the shadow side of burnout and exhaustion and finger pointing and things that can be brought into change making. And then the alternative that you're pointing to of really being aware of both the product and the process as one. And I'll just share that when you were talking about self-care and kind of cringing at that phrase, and I think many people do because it conventionally has been used to point to small self. And yet, when I hear the word self-care in this context, I really hear caring for one's essence, caring for one's connection to source. If we care each and every day to our connection to source, to our essence, then we can show up and be of service in our world from essence, from source connection. This language might not resonate with everyone. It's language that is deeply true for me. But I do know that when it comes even to preparing ourselves for these kinds of disasters, there is a level in which the best preparation is being prepared to meet whatever happens to us in life in any moment from presence and from our larger self rather than small self. So when we're practicing that approach to self-care, we're talking about something much bigger, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Can
And
I ask you? Oh,
yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
just that I'm grateful that for your own journey of recognizing, oh, I've hit a point where this is unsustainable. And
Yeah.
we could spend our whole conversation like listing you have accomplished extraordinary things. And yet it wasn't working in a holistic way, it sounds like. It wasn't also taking care of your essence, of you. So I like the definition of service as not necessarily I am trying to be of service to you. I'm trying to save the world, like subject, object, but a sense of interconnected being, interconnected presence, where I show up to service for the whole, and I remember that I am also part of the whole, right?
Yeah. I had a very interesting data point on that concept, which was I one of the very first projects that I did with Random X was in the wake of the earthquake in Haiti. We built an orphanage there, and it was a very big and beautiful project, and has had a long and lasting impact. But my strategy for raising money for that was to bring my fans with me on a trip down to Haiti, and each person that came had to raise $5,000 at least to contribute to this project. And everybody, including myself, had the expectation that we would, as a group of mostly American Westerners going down to Haiti to help out in the wake of this disaster, we would be bringing resources to help uh, Haitians. And probably the greater impact was on the people who came down on the trips. They were more changed than the people who were receiving the money and the building that we built. I just saw firsthand over and over again all of these people reporting like, this has completely changed my life. I'm not the same person anymore. And I think we can fall into that pattern of thinking that it's this just one way funnel of resources from one. It's a zero sum game, like where I'm giving to you. But the truth is, it's all interconnected, of course. And we're all being impacted by those transactions. And the giver is often more the receiver than they know.
I love that. I really do. And I also feel like part of what I've been reminded of in this whole experience is that community resiliency, if we really want to reflect on that as a collective, what is community resiliency and what is personal resiliency? I think it has so much to do at a very basic but profound level with our willingness to give and receive moment by moment, to be the giver and to understand, to recognize the joy of that, um, and to be willing to receive. So many people I've witnessed receiving help in this, receiving support, who didn't really have that in their um, self-definition so much. And also people giving, like, oh my gosh, this giving is opening up my heart so deeply. It's an opportunity to just deepen our sense of belonging. And that's certainly something we all need and are hungry, if not starving for, in a world where a lot of the dominant paradigm is forgetting that basic thing. What is it to know our belonging, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question about your experience in this process, having been impacted and having had this loss to yourself personally and also to your community?
Yeah.
How has that impacted your thinking about your relationship to your work in the world and to these bigger issues of climate change and social impact? And
Yeah.
how has it changed you to be kind of the victim of one of these tragedies?
Mm.
If I
Thank you.
don't know, that's a strange word, but it's a
No,
loaded word. But
yeah, it's okay. I'm aware that I'm going to be sitting with that question for some time. I'm aware that ever since we came down off the mountain, we're kind of in a soup of transition. We're in what's talked about in Buddhism as the bardos, the complete liminality, after there's a death. And this has been a kind of death, losing our home, the place that we uh, felt and created so much belonging and community. And so in that soup, there's a whole lot of reflecting going on. And there's a gratitude for the invitation to almost die and then to reflect anew at, okay, everything has been washed away. And so we're not jumping to recreate things. It has to be a slow process. We're not hurrying anything. There has to be a period of grief and gestation and letting this entire process transform us internally. And it will transform both aspects of how we live, and I'm happy to speak to some of that, and also how we serve. And so I don't have a concrete, conclusive answer for you yet. I just know that everything that I do going forth, that I offer, will be informed by this experience. It has changed me entirely. Just experiencing firsthand a storm that severe, even though I thought I had experienced severe weather, um, has blown my mind and heart open. And I'll also name that it's just interesting for me because, as you know, I lived for many years off the grid and in intentional communities. I was a Buddhist monk for 7.5 years. For a long time, I only owned, 2 pairs of shoes and lived about as simply as I felt one could live on this earth. And then there was a period of choosing to live and teach in the world where I could reach more people and I thought be of more service, but that also built up a little bit more, still living simply, but a little bit more of a material world. I own more than 2 pairs of shoes now, or I did until a couple weeks ago. And even reflecting on that, like seeing one's entire material world, even if it was simple, swept away, has just been an interesting reminder. Like in each day of our lives, how much attention needs to go to the material world That's our energy. That's our life force. I don't know if I want any attention going there. The bare minimum is what feels good to me. Even how we live, I don't know that I'll live in a wooden house again after seeing it crash down and on me. Like once upon a time, I lived in straw bale. I think I might go back to that tiny home, like just these kinds of choices. And then also recognizing that in the communities that I work with and serve, I'm always dedicated to helping people prepare for the changes and happenings in our lives, personal and collective. Preparing for the unknown by being radically present is a big part of my teaching. But I feel that there's something brewing now specific to helping climate refugees and to being more aware of how prevalent this is in today's world. It's prevalent, it's real. We hear about it, though often through the filtered news, almost every day, right? And then lastly, just being reminded. My friends joke, like as if I needed the reminder of impermanence. This is a teaching I've devoted my life to, but apparently maybe I needed the reminder. And just recognizing that our time here is so short. Each and every one of us has no idea if today is the last day we will ever live. And knowing that, how do we choose to show up? How do we choose? What do we choose to feed the stories and condition narrative that takes us away from essence, from authenticity? Are we willing to make more radical choices because we live in an age of such unknown? That lights me up wildly. That completely illuminates my entire system, like a sense that actually perhaps we all chose to be alive now in this time of raging change, in this time of absolute collective uncertainty. And what does that call forth in us? That excites me, Misha, to no end. And in part because I've witnessed so many people over all my years of teaching and through my own practice, the choice that we have in every moment. I've witnessed so many people hear that call and step forward in absolutely extraordinary ways to live the life they're here to meet, because it's totally unknown, completely uncertain when our last day will be. I'm curious what that stirs in you.
It feels like a reminder and a rally call, and also excites me. I was just having a conversation this morning about more radical rethinking about the ways in which was talking to my partner this morning on the phone about the ways in which we are inadvertently opting into systems that we know aren't serving us or our children or the rest of the world. And how there are so many constant reminders available in our daily lives to check in on that question. Is this something that I could opt out of? And is there a different system or a different path forward that I could be participating in? And um, I think it's so easy to go on autopilot. And sometimes it takes these jarring calamities to remind us that there is another way. And I've known you for long enough to know that um, you you find the lessons in these things and the teachings, and are not one to wallow in self-pity or despair. So I'm not surprised to hear you getting fired up about the prospect of new insights from this. But yeah, it resonates with me. It
Yeah.
resonates.
Yeah. And I appreciate what you shared about being awake to the places that we can opt out, being awake to what are we colluding with, what are we participating in unconsciously that we actually have choice around. That's a very alive, very important place, I believe, for all of humanity right now. And that I'm reminded when I made the transition from living as a monastic to living out in the world, it was, I will live in the world without being of the world, and kind of continually questioning, what does that mean? What does that mean? Because I think it serves everyone to be aware of the intersubjective nature of conditioning, and that even without us recognizing it consciously, if there are made up stories, made up paradigms that are truly not life affirming, that our neighbors, our families, our parents, our friends are believing, it can just feel normal. Oh, yeah, we all just, this is the relationship we all have to consumption, or this is the relationship we all have to capitalism, as an example, or this is the relationship we have to self-consciousness. It can be anything. And recognizing, actually, you all have a choice about all of it, from a deep down place. That's the place I hope gets ignited in more people, right?
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. I'm curious if you want to say something about just what's alive for you around this, given you're a parent. And Misha, you can just keep me in the flow of timing, linear time, when you
Uh-huh.
bring it to a close. But that is a curious.
Um, well, I mean, the question of the degree to which autopilot and, I don't know, collective conditioning is impacting my kids is definitely one that I wrestle with. And it is really challenging because you're not able to put your child in a perfect cocoon and totally curate the cultural experience that they're going to have. I send my children to school, and at school, they have teachers and they have classmates who are all participating in various different systems. Even the curriculum that the school is selecting is not necessarily the curriculum that I would be selecting. And and then there are all of these trends of, devices and connectivity. My son does all of his homework on a on a cloud portal. So he is, by virtue of being plugged into his school, he's plugged into the internet. He's plugged into his computer. He's having this very virtual, very online experience. And then I'm too busy with my broader life to put up all the firewalls that I need to protect the kids from that. And so we have to do these like little nudgings and course corrects along the way, but also have a high degree of acceptance that this is the river in which we are drifting along. And somehow that's also got to be okay. I mean, we are of the world and we are in it. And as a lay person with children in that experience, and for various different reasons, somewhat um, disempowered from totally unplugging and taking the kids to I can't run away with my children and put them on a farm off the grid somewhere, as much as that sounds appealing. Um, so there has to be a certain degree of just there has to be a certain amount of just fortifying the kids and trusting that it's going to be okay.
Yes, and I think there's a lot of power in the way you're talking about it, because it's the power of the both and. We're living in it, and there's also those places where I can model other ways of doing things for my kids, or I can model authenticity, but the both and. I actually think it's less powerful for people to say there's something I need to completely protect my kids from, by taking them away and never exposing them to it. Whereas you're pointing to more of a, this is the world we live in. There has to be trust. And I think trusting life is a theme sort of weaving through this conversation today. Does that resonate?
Yeah.
So I like the way that you're talking about it, and also just acknowledging, in trusting life, there's like a way we talk about it in Buddhism is true nature, like trusting true nature or trusting authentic self, trusting larger self, trusting essence, trusting that even with exposure to all kinds of things that might be a bit nonsensical or highly conditioned, that energy comes through strongly, that energy prevails. So how do we cultivate that in our young people? And I'm reflecting as we're talking about just some of the people in my family when I was growing up who simply by them modeling uh, serious authenticity, come from a family with a lot of artists and rabble rousers who were sort of just a part of the dominant paradigm with a step out of it, that their inspiration really showed me something, their commitment to a way of being throughout everything else that I was exposed to. Um, I have an uncle who died this past year who was a well-known poet, Neely Cherkovsky, and from the age of 12 on, he knew I'm here to write poetry, and that's what he did every single day of his life and built a life, which is very challenging in today's world, simply around living, breathing, being poetry. And like his model inspired so much for me. So it was having that exposure alongside things much more conventional. And I think we can trust essence to figure it out, right?
Yeah. I had a similar childhood modeling in my mother, who did a lot of things wrong, and and it was not an easy childhood, and I am still figuring out how to deal with some of the traumas of that, I think. And he definitely modeled this: question everything, chart your own course, um, and trust your own vision for what is possible in your life. This mentality that she had, which was totally visionary in some respects, and has completely, I credit, so much of the good things in my life with having had that modeling, you know. Um, but a lot of that modeling that I was exposed to was, you don't have to conform to the dominant paradigm. There are other choices available to you. And remembering that that's such an important message to convey to our kids. That's the most important message. Sure, you can play with your iPad, but remember, you have a choice.
Yeah, yeah. I'm with you. I'm with you. The generosity of modeling choice. Yeah, yeah. I'm with you. Yeah. And then also helping our young people through, look out at all that we see needs addressing with a kind of immediacy, a kind of yes, a kind of we're willing to roll up our sleeves and be of service, minus the urgency and maybe even terror that ends up putting a lot of people into a sort of stuck place or a um, continually stressed place. I mean, it's so overwhelming. Even just these storms, one after another, these weather changes,
Mhm.
quite overwhelming at times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also really important not to be doing the work of of contribution in this life from a place of despair, which can be a great motivator, but is not, it's not the right fuel.
Yes, it's not the right fuel. It fuels more despair,
Right.
actually. Yeah, yeah. And is there anything you want to say about just sort of your path, like what's emerging for and through you from this storm you've witnessed, from the multiple climate events that you've shown up in service to, your own experience of getting completely off balance, trying to be of service, and then creating a different way or course. What's sort of fresh and emergent for you in your work around that and just your life?
I think the most salient thing right now is just the recognition that if you don't if you don't take care of yourself, if I don't take care of myself, it's a house of cards in that you're building and trying to take care of anyone else, or the world at large. And I I feel a lot more potential in myself when I'm coming from that place of groundedness to be impactful as well, you know? I know that I can do so much more from having a solid footing myself. So I'm excited, uh, you know, to figure out how to face that future and to, and I know that we're going to go through a lot of hard chapters, and we have this election coming up, and the betting pools are now favoring Trump winning, uh, and they are almost always right. So it's going to be really close, and it's entirely possible that Trump will win again, and that will be a really challenging and dark chapter, and it will be really easy to descend into despair for me if that happens. And I just want to like take the lessons from these things as they come, and find the way to be resilient and work from a place of knowing that you're doing what you can and you're not going to fix everything.
Yes, I really appreciate that you presenced that as we're approaching the elections, and knowing that we're all holding maybe that creative tension between hope and what if. And so the way that you named it, I heard you reminding us that regardless of what happens, regardless of who wins, that we do all still need to remember to make our choice to show up grounded each day, to recognize the choice that we have in each moment in how we show up, to meet with presence, whatever the outcome is. That is going to be a far greater contribution, regardless who wins, than despair, or now we've got who we want in office, now we can go to sleep in different ways. You with me?
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Staying present and together in this continual unfolding. I just want to name that when you were talking and talking about the importance of self-care in the larger sense, I was reminded of the degree to which that allows us to show up to the relational field, dropped into a quality of presence that might be perhaps the most important thing in today's world. Instead of having transactional interactions, instead of being not present with and for one another, instead of having surface interactions and communications, how we show up to relational presence really matters throughout all the beautiful and difficult stuff we have coming. And when you were talking about self-care, that's like one of the foundations of being able to show up to the relational field in a useful way, in a way that also acknowledges we might not be here tomorrow. So what is the degree to which I'm willing to be present? Yeah.
Mhm.
So thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Um, I think I probably have to wrap up, but I wanted to just add one more thing. Um, for anyone who is watching this, because I drew you to this video, I would like to also draw your attention to the fact that that Eden's community has put together a GoFundMe for her and Mark. And as is the case for so many people impacted by these storms, Eden and Mark did not have flood insurance. And so rebuilding is something that's going to require the support of the community. And I would encourage anyone who's watching this to make a small contribution to Eden, who is somebody who has devoted her life to the service of others. It feels nice and fitting that others should rally to your support and service at this moment. So I'm just going to encourage everyone to show you a token of support.
Misha,
And it's
thank
not transactional,
you.
but if some of Eden's wisdom has touched you, maybe that would be a good way of showing appreciation too.
Thank you, Misha. Thank you for naming that. And for people listening, I'll share a link connected to this of about a 10-minute video we made on our property about what happened and sort of walks you through some of the intensity, the reality, climate change, and also share some reflections on the topic. So, Misha, thank you so much for taking time today to connect. I feel like I'm just coming out of the rubble still, and it feels really affirming to me just to get to sit down and have a heart to heart and to have it benefit others. So this means a lot to me. Thank you.
Me too. Me too. Nice to see you, Eden.
You too. You too. Next time, let's pick better circumstances. Okay.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Take good care.
Goodbye. And thank you.